Hello friends, very good evening. Welcome to the Hindu analysis by LTX classes. First article that we are going to look at today is from page number 6, op-ed article, whose GDP is it anyway? Obviously this comes under your General Studies paper 3 Indian Economy. General Studies paper 3 Indian Economy, my favorite subject. So what is this editorial or the op-ed article trying to convey? Very simple fact. The title itself conveys the whole meaning. Whose GDP is it anyway? What is the meaning of this title? We all talk about GDP, but why? Ultimately, what matters? For whom are we talking about it? For whom is the country growing? For whom should the fruits of the country's growth reach? It is the people. Ultimately, if the GDP is not going to help, the growth in GDP is not going to help people, if the growth in GDP is not helping people rise their living standard, what is the point of measuring GDP? And why this obsession with measurement of GDP? Rather, we should look at other parameters which help improve the lives of people. This in essence is the crux of the story. So let's look at the content one by one. So it starts by saying, what is the significance and impact of GDP growth for common man? The answer, very little. You might say we have grown 20%, we have grown 30%, but if the lives of common man don't change, there is no significance for him. For him it doesn't matter whether you are growing 5% or 10%. If his life is not changing, it doesn't matter to him. And the author is supporting his argument with some data points. Look at this. The average person's primary and perhaps sole concern about the economy is obviously the income that they can earn. If economy is growing, for him the economy is growing only when he is able to earn more income. The single most important demand of all people in India is jobs. Obviously we need jobs. Only with jobs we will be able to sustain ourselves and our families. A high quality, not what kind of a job? A high quality formal sector job, not an informal sector job. If you got a job as a construction worker, no, that's not people are looking for. People are looking for a formal sector job which has social security, which has job security and social security like your health insurance, life insurance, accidental insurance, PF, gratuity and all these things. When you have all these things, then you have a sense of security, sense of dignity, something that offers dignity of work, something that gives you good income, something that gives you job security. This is the kind of jobs people are aspiring for. Then it is apparent that GDP growth matters to the average Indian only if it can generate good quality jobs and incomes for them. Yes, this is what they are looking at. Only if it can generate good quality jobs for them, generate good incomes for them, only then for them GDP growth matters. But is it happening in reality? Let's look at it. According to the data published by Reserve Bank of India, if you see between 1980 and 1990, every 1 percentage point of GDP growth generated 2 lakh new jobs in the formal sector. Which means if the GDP grew by 1%, it created 2 lakh formal sector jobs. If the GDP grew by 10%, it means it has created 20 lakh formal sector jobs which matter to common man in India. This was in 1980s and 90s. And what happened later on? And then when you move to 1990 to 2000s, every 1 percentage point of GDP growth yielded roughly 1 lakh new formal sector jobs. Earlier in 1980 to 1990, it was 2 lakh jobs. Now it is 1 lakh new jobs. Every 1% of GDP growth generated 2 lakhs then. Now every 1% of GDP growth generated only 1 lakh. And between 2000 to 2010, the next decade, it only generated 52,000 new jobs. And RBI stopped publishing this data from 2011 to 12. So for 2010 to 20 decade, we do not have the number. But we can guess it would have fallen even further. Like if you are extrapolating with every decade, the data is the number of jobs getting generated is going down with every decade. That is what he is summarizing here. In essence, 1% of GDP growth today yields less than 1/4 the number of good quality jobs that it did in 1980s. Today's GDP growth is not translating into more number of jobs. Economists call it jobless growth. This is called jobless growth. Although we have growth, but we do not have jobs. Why? Did you ever think about it? Because of technological advancements. Now we are trying to replace people with technology. If you are replacing people with technology, what happened? You will grow, but people will become jobless. That is why we call it jobless growth. So that is the reason they are saying the correlation between formal sector jobs and GDP growth has completely weakened. High growth doesn't necessarily mean more jobs for common man, more jobs and more income for common man. Only rich are getting richer, but common man is unable to earn much with this higher GDP. Right? So GDP might be a good economic measure, but it is becoming increasingly irrelevant as a political measure because it impacts only a select few. Only few industrialists are getting richer, but a vast majority of people are still remaining poor and their incomes are not changing. They're not getting new jobs. So we are seeing a divorce of GDP growth and jobs. And this divorce means disconnect. This disconnection between GDP growth and jobs is a reflection of the changed nature of the contemporary economic development. I have already explained it. The contemporary economic development has focused more on technology and efficiency than people, with emphasis on capital driven efficiency. They are putting more and more emphasis on capital driven. Capital means investment, money. So they are investing in machinery, they are investing in technology and machinery which they can buy with money, and they are trying to replace people at the cost of labor. So GDP growth is not translating into more jobs. So GDP growth becomes an inadequate measure. Ultimately, why do we measure GDP? Think about it. I want you to think in a holistic manner. There is a saying in Telugu by great Gurajada Apparao. He said, Desam ante matti kadoy, desam ante manushuloy. What does that mean in English? The meaning of a country, the meaning of a nation is not the land it has. The meaning of a nation is its people. Country means its people. Nation means its people. It is not land, it is not money. Are you getting this? Very important. So ultimately, whatever we are trying to do should help our people. Earlier, we used to think if we are focusing completely on GDP growth, GDP reflects what? Your national income. Total amount of goods and services produced in the country in an economic year. If we are able to produce more goods and more services, which would automatically translate to more income for the country and which would automatically translate to more income for all people, that is what we used to think earlier. Unfortunately, this entire income is getting concentrated in the hands of select few. Few industrialists are getting richer because of this, and it is not translating It is not creating more and more jobs. Ultimately, people are not getting benefited by GDP growth. If people are not directly getting benefited out of GDP growth, then why are we focusing so much on GDP and not focusing on other things which actually matter to this person? Right? Economic growth doesn't mean anything to common man today. So what matters to him, that has to be focused, that has to be measured, that has to be measured. Look at this. Nobel laureate Simon Kuznets, who conceived of GDP as a measure of economic performance, never intended it to be the single-minded economic pursuit of a nation that has now become and it has now become, and warned repeatedly that it is not a measure of societal well-being. Very important. It is only a measure of economic performance of the country, and it is not a measure of societal well-being. If it is not translating into societal well-being, what is the point in going behind GDP? What is the point in going behind GDP? Right? If you are going behind GDP at all costs, forgetting everything, it can only be counterproductive. It will only backfire. It is not going to help. This sentence is very, very important. Read this. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Beautifully constructed sentence. Look at this. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Look at this. Our target should be well-being of people. Keep this in mind. This should be our target. Earlier, we used to feel if we achieve good GDP, it would automatically translate into well-being of people. That is why we started measuring GDP. We started measuring GDP and we started comparing our GDP compared to last year, whether it is growing or not growing. Now what happened? People forgot the actual target and they started targeting GDP. All the policies of the government have started targeting GDP. They forgot that GDP is only a means. GDP was supposed to be the means to achieve well-being of people. But now it is no longer a means to achieve well-being of the people. And the countries forgot. All the countries across the world have forgotten about it and they are blindly going behind. They are obsessed with measuring GDP. The obsession with GDP has to end. It is not just in India, it is everywhere. There is excessive obsession over GDP across the world today. Even if you go to US, it produces fewer jobs for every percentage point of GDP growth than it did in 1990s. The same happens in China. It is not just in India, across the world the same thing is happening. Now, the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, they generally proclaim winners among nations with good GDP growth. So they will create a contest and they will declare one country as the winner, a country with the fastest GDP growth. Unfortunately, when fastest growing economies are unable to provide prosperity, social mobility for their people, what is the point? This disillusionment is bound to erupt. Somewhere it will be open and people will revolt against the countries. The political leaders might say we have achieved so much growth, but if it is not translating into well-being of people, people will come out of this illusionment and they will revolt against the government. So through political process means using your protests or using your vote during elections. This is what happens. This is what leads to agitations. Then what should we do? And what is the way forward? All this is fine. But what is the way forward? We have understood that GDP should not be the sole measure of well-being. But what should we do? What is the way forward that the author is suggesting? The author is suggesting an expanded dashboard. Keep this in mind. You need to write this in your mains. Whenever you write answers, you need some content for your way forward and conclusion. And this provides your way forward. This is the reason you should read editorials. When you read an editorial, you will understand a particular author, a prominent person, how he analyzes a particular issue. And when he analyzes, he comes out with all the problems and he also comes out with all the solutions at the end. When you go through these solutions, you will have some ideas at the back of your mind which you can use in the exam. Look at this. In 2008, the then French president Nicolas Sarkozy, he assembled the Commission on Measurement of Economic Performance and Social Progress, and he tasked Nobel laureate economists Joseph Stiglitz, Amartya Sen from India and others to develop a more comprehensive measurement framework of economic and social performance as an alternative to the excessive reliance of GDP as a sole measure. Let's not rely only on GDP. Let's create a comprehensive framework of economic performance which includes several other things which actually matter to general public. And the report finally concluded that what we measure affects what we do. Very, very important. Very, very important point. What we measure affects what we do. There is a saying, what gets measured gets done. If everybody is measuring, if everybody is focusing something, then everybody's energy will be on that particular thing and we will do that. If you are measuring only GDP and your objective and your energy will be put towards only increasing GDP. If you are measuring other aspects, for example, if you are actively measuring number of jobs created, if you are actively measuring, if that is a headline item, then maybe the government and the political policy makers, they will all think about how to create more jobs. Unfortunately, today it is not happening. What we measure affects what we do, and recommended an expanded dashboard of multiple indicators unique for each country. It cannot be same for all countries. So each country is different, a developing country is different, developed country is different, the priorities of countries are different. So depending upon your own priorities, we can have a unique expanded dashboard for each country depending upon the priorities of the country. So that is what the Committee of Nobel Laureates recommended to the French president. And finally, look at this statement, very important. Everything that counts cannot be counted. Everything that can be counted does not count. Very, very important sentence. For example, there is an item, there is an issue which is very important, but it cannot be measured. It cannot be measured. Let's call it A. And there is another thing not so important, but it can be measured. What is the meaning of this? Just because you can measure it, it doesn't mean it is important. Just because you can't measure it, it doesn't mean it is not important. That is the meaning of this. GDP can be measured. That doesn't mean GDP is very important. There are certain things which cannot be measured. That doesn't mean they are not important. We have to keep this in mind. The policy makers should keep this in mind. Should keep this in mind. So that is the GDP growth paradox that we are facing today. GDP can be measured, but it is not translating into societal well-being today. So it is not important for the society today. So finally, what should opposition parties do? They must clamor, which means they must voice out their concerns. They must voice out in a loud manner for an overhaul. Overhaul means complete transformation, renovation of India's economic performance measurement framework to reflect what truly matters to the common person. You have to keep this man in mind and figure out what matters to him, and then come out with a economic performance measurement framework and then focus on that. This is the conclusion to this beautiful article. That's about it. Let's move on to the next article. The second article of the day from page number 1 comes under your General Studies paper 2, Polity and Governance and Election Issue. So here the issue is about freebies. Now what happened? So there is a case filed in Supreme Court. Look at the news, then we will get into the actual news item. There is a case filed in Supreme Court by this man called Ashwini Kumar Upadhyay. So he was saying the offer and distribution of irrational freebies amounted to bribery. It is equivalent to bribery and it is equivalent to unduly influencing voters. It is like giving bribe to voters and influencing them. So this is not a good sign for democracy. It will not lead to free and fair elections. Free and fair elections is one of the pillars of democracy. Unfortunately, when you are unduly influencing voters using these freebies, and voters will not be able to vote in a unbiased manner. Without influence, they will not be able to vote. They will be under the influence of these lure of freebies. That is what the petitioner is saying. And he is also saying, in India, all the states that we have today have over 70 lakh crore debts. And he also suggested Law Commission of India be asked to examine the statute means laws, to control the giving away of unreasonable freebies. Today we do not have a separate law which can regulate the election promises. So this man is asking the Supreme Court to direct the Law Commission of India to come out with a new law or recommend a new law to control the giving away of these unreasonable freebies. So before getting into the response of Election Commission of India as well as the Supreme Court, I would like to give you some briefing about this culture of freebies, whether it is good or bad. Of course, there will be both sides of the coin. As a UPSC aspirant, you need to look at both sides of the coin. But let's understand in a rational, logical manner. Should we continue to give freebies? Think about it. If a state's economy is healthy and the state is generating a lot of cash, the state has a surplus of budget, in that case you can distribute it. When you are able to generate excess cash, you can distribute it among underprivileged without any problem. You can distribute in the form of freebies. Unfortunately, in today's India, we do not have these healthy economies in any of the states. What we have is poorly managed economies or fiscally profligate economies, which means economies are state finances which are not managed in a prudent manner, which are not managed in a reasonable manner. They are always focused on elections. All the state governments are predominantly focused on elections to win the confidence of voters. They are using these freebies as attractions. And in order to fund these freebies, they are borrowing. They are not funding these freebies using earned money. They are funding these freebies using borrowed money. In return, they are also crossing the limits set by Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. This particular act controls the amount of money a government can take as debt. Unfortunately, all the state governments are flouting the norms, are violating the norms. In the name of freebies, they are borrowing a lot of money. From the open market and then giving them away to people in the form of freebies. And this excess borrowing is putting a lot of pressure on finances. And all the future earnings of the government will be used to service the debt. Even if you earn more money in the future, that money will be used only to service the debt, to pay the interest component of the borrowing you have already undertaken. This is the scenario today. How long can we sustain? How long can it be allowed to go on is the primary question. Does that mean we should completely remove the culture of freebies? We should not give any welfare schemes? We should not help the underprivileged? No. We can help the underprivileged, we can help the poor people, but that help should be in the form of improving productive capacity, improving productive capacities of people. You can give them a sewing machine, and if they start using it and start generating money for themselves, so that means they have improved their productive capacity, and they will be able to sustain themselves in future and will not rely on the government. Unfortunately, these kind of things are not happening, but free distribution of money is happening. Instead of focusing on improving the productive capacity, instead of focusing on health and education and capacity building, it includes skill building. Instead of focusing on these activities, governments are resorting to freely distributing money in the name of freebies, which is not a good sign, which is not a healthy sign for the economy. Instead, they can spend money on improving health facilities, education facilities, improving the skill set of people, right, and improving their productive capacity so that they can earn a job, they can earn a living for themselves. That is good. Especially if you are generating a lot of cash, it's okay, but you are not generating money, you are taking a lot of loans and then you are distributing that to people in the name of freebies without even trying to improve their productive capacity. That is not justified. That is the reason Supreme Court has asked the government of India to consider this issue as a serious issue, and it has asked the government of India to take a stand. Why don't you take a stand on this issue? Come out with your own stand, and you can consult Finance Commission for suggestions, because Finance Commission is an independent constitutional body. Since it is an independent constitutional body full of economic experts, you can consult them and take their suggestions and take a stand on this issue. If the center government takes a stand against or in favor of this, they can accordingly create a law. They can ask the Law Commission of India to come and recommend a law. So that is the reason Supreme Court has directed the central government to consult Finance Commission and then take a stand on this serious issue which is troubling the state finances today. Similarly, Election Commission was also come out with its own opinion. So Election Commission, in its affidavit, it said it cannot regulate state policies and decisions taken after by the winning party when they form the government. Once they form the government, we cannot do anything. We cannot dictate their decisions. We cannot influence their policies. And we do not have any enabling provisions for now. Without any enabling provisions in the Representation of Peoples Act 1950 and 51, it will be an overreach of powers. We do not have powers to direct state governments to do something or ask them not to do something. That is what Election Commission of India said. Election Commission of India has also said there is no provision for derecognizing a political party for distribution of irrational freebies. Because this particular man, Upadhyay, he was asking the Election Commission of India to deregister the party, derecognize the party. If they are offering these irrational freebies, please deregister and derecognize them. That is what he has been asking the Election Commission of India, and Election Commission of India has responded by saying there is no such provision in the Representation of Peoples Act 1951 today. So we cannot, without any enabling provision, we will not be able to do what you are asking for. That is what Election Commission of India said. It's a very interesting and important issue. So one must put a lot of focus on it. The third article of the day, India adds 5 more Ramsar sites. This comes under your General Studies paper 3, environmental pollution and degradation. So what is this new item? So there are 5 more Ramsar sites from India. 3 of them are in Tamil Nadu, 1 in Madhya Pradesh, and the other one is in Mizoram. Where are they? Look at this. This is Kirikili Bird Sanctuary, Pallikaranai Marsh Reserve Forest, and Pichavaram Mangrove. These three are in Tamil Nadu. And also Sakhya Sagar in Madhya Pradesh, the Pala Wetlands in Mizoram. So these five have got international recognition as Ramsar sites. But what is this Ramsar site? What is the meaning of wetland? What is the meaning of Ramsar site? And what happens when a wetland has been recognized as a Ramsar site? So let's look at some basics of it. Luckily for us, the news itself has covered a lot of basics. If you see this particular portion I am looking at, wetland, what is the meaning of wetland? Our environmental ministry defines wetland as an area of marsh, means muddy, fen, means low lying with a lot of grass, peatlands means semi-decomposed, a land with semi-decomposed vegetation. Plants are there, but they are not completely decomposed because of lot of availability of water. So they are semi-decomposed. If there is an area with a lot of semi-decomposed vegetation, you call it a peatland or water, whether it is natural or artificial, permanent or temporary, with static water or flowing water, which it could be fresh water, salt water, brackish water, including areas of marine water. Of course, the depth should not exceed 6 meters. If it is marine water, depth should not exceed 6 meters. So all of them come under wetlands, but they do not include river channels, paddy fields, human-made water bodies, tanks, and tanks specifically constructed for drinking water purposes, structures specifically constructed for aquaculture, salt production, recreation, irrigation. So these things do not come under wetlands, only these come under wetlands. What is the significance of wetland? The significance of wetland is they sustain a lot of biodiversity. Diverse organisms live there. Diverse organism, plant species, animal species, bird species live there. That is the reason we need to preserve these wetlands. Next question, are all wetlands Ramsar sites? Answer is no. All wetlands are not Ramsar sites. First of all, what is a Ramsar site? What is a Ramsar site? Look at this. In 1971, here it was given as 1961, this is wrong. In 1971, in the city called Ramsar in Iran, there was an international convention which was adopted. An international convention was adopted in 1971, 2nd February, and this 2nd February is referred to as World Wetland Day. We call it World Wetland Day. On this particular day, this Ramsar Convention was adopted and it came into force in 1975. It was adopted in 1971 but came into force in 1975. So this convention on wetlands is an intergovernmental treaty, which means it is not just one government, many governments across the world are part of this treaty. So this provides a framework. This treaty provides a framework for conservation and wise use of wetlands. We have wetlands, but we need to conserve them. They are in danger because of several human activities and agricultural activities. We need to conserve them in order to conserve the biodiversity that we have, and we need to use them in a wise manner, and we need to conserve the resources that these wetlands have, right? For that, this international treaty was adopted on 2nd February 1971, which came into force in 1975. This is the background about Ramsar Convention. But how will you know whether a wetland is a Ramsar site or not? For that, it need to meet at least one of 9 criteria. There are 9 criteria. What is that? They have to support vulnerable, endangered or critically endangered species. or threatened ecological communities, or if it supports regularly 20,000 or more water birds, or if it is an important source of food for fishes, or if it is a spawning ground. What is the meaning of spawning ground? A place where animals lay their eggs. If it is a spawning ground, nursery or migration path on which fish stocks are dependent upon. If it meets any of the criteria, only then the wetland will be recognized as a Ramsar site. According to National Wetland Inventory and Assessment compiled by ISRO, India has wetlands spanning 1,52,600 square kilometers. Right. So these 5 have been recognized as wetlands. We have understood what is a wetland. We have also understood what is this Ramsar Convention. We have also understood how a wetland can be recognized as a Ramsar Convention. But what is the meaning of this? Let's say we have designated a particular wetland as Ramsar Convention or Ramsar site. What does it mean? Is there any benefit? Look at this. Designating a Ramsar site, a wetland as a Ramsar site, does not necessarily invite extra international funds. Will you get any extra international funds? No. But the states and the center, they must ensure that these tracts of land are conserved. If you are designating a land, if you are designating a wetland as Ramsar site, since you are a signatory to Ramsar Convention, you have the responsibility, the governments have the responsibility to conserve these from encroachment. We should not let others use these lands. They must be conserved from encroachment. But there is one benefit. Acquiring this label, if a particular wetland has acquired the label of Ramsar site, it helps with locals' tourism potential. Obviously, people will pay attention to that area. They will flock, they will go and visit that place frequently, and it helps the tourism, and also international visibility also will go up. Until 1981, we had 41 Ramsar sites. Now another 13 got added. So today we have 54 Ramsar sites. So this is all about this particular article. Very important from the perspective of UPSC prelims. I have covered all the basics as well. Final article of the day. Karnataka High Court notice to center on Twitter plea challenging blocking. So this comes under your General Studies paper 2. This comes under your General Studies paper 2, GS2, Polity and Governance. So we need to understand what has happened. First of all, the government of India has sent a lot of notices to Twitter asking it to block several accounts. You can see it here. It was asked to block 1474 accounts and 175 tweets. And if you don't follow these blocking orders, and there will be penal action, would be initiated against Twitter. That was the notice sent to Twitter on 27th June 2022. Okay, whatever tweets from whichever accounts government felt they were inappropriate, they were endangering sovereignty and integrity of the nation, right? The government asked Twitter to remove those tweets and also block those accounts. In reaction to this, Twitter has filed a petition in Karnataka High Court. Twitter has filed a petition in Karnataka High Court. So what is the point in favor of Twitter? Very, very important. I want you to take a look at this aspect here. The blocking orders that the government has given are contrary to the procedures and safeguards prescribed in the Information Technology Procedures and Safeguards for Blocking of Access to Information by Public Rules 2009, the petitioner claims. What are the rules and what are the procedures? As per this, there are certain rules which the government of India has to follow whenever it issues a blocking order. Whenever it issues a blocking order under IT Act, it must follow certain rules. What are the rules? First thing, it must call for hearing. It must call for hearing of the author of the content. whoever is the author of the content, whoever has tweeted, you must call him and ask him to give his opinion. It is like giving the other person a chance to speak. You must also give an opportunity to the intermediary. Who is the intermediary here? Twitter. You must also give the opportunity to the intermediary, which is Twitter, also to give its opinion. To give its opinion. Only after listening to the opinions of the intermediary as well as the author of the content, then you can issue the next step. Then you can take the next step. This is bare minimum that the government is supposed to do. And based on this rule only, in 2015, in this Shreya Singhal versus Union of India, in this particular case, Government of India has upheld the validity of Section 69A of IT Act. Government of India has upheld, which means it has supported. Shreya Singhal wanted this section to be repealed, but the government did not repeal it. The government upheld the Section 69A of IT Act. Why? Because it has these protective measures. Because of these rules. So government is not arbitrarily and unilaterally asking anyone to remove content. It is also supposed to give an opportunity for them to speak out. Because you are giving an opportunity for them to speak out, there is a possibility that the issue gets settled. Because of these provisions, which gives an opportunity to the author of the content as well as the intermediary to speak out, Supreme Court in Shreya Singhal case has upheld the validity of Section 69A of the Information Technology Act. So based on this and also based on the nature of content, the Government of India has asked Twitter to remove a lot of content, but the content is more of journalistic nature, political nature. Okay, political criticism cannot be called detrimental to the integrity of the nation, right? And a journalistic content cannot be called detrimental to sovereignty of the nation, right? So this is normal content. The normal content which is not harmful, that is first thing. Second thing, Twitter was not asked to give its opinion. Third thing, the people giving the content, the people who are tweeting, they were also not given an opportunity to give their view. Because of these reasons, Twitter has approached Karnataka High Court. Now Karnataka High Court has given a notice to center. It has given a notice to center asking it to come out with its version. So this is all about this particular topic. It comes into news again and again. We will discuss it again and again. That's about it for today. Take care. Bye bye. Give your feedback in the comment section.